My name is Rhea Malhotra. I am 25 years old, I work in commercial leasing, and I found out my sister thought I was a freeloader on the afternoon she stood in the doorway of the apartment we shared and told me to be gone by the weekend. She said it almost gently, which was somehow worse. Rhea, she said, I think it's time you found your own place. I've been carrying you for a year and I can't keep doing it. It's not fair to me. My sister Tara is 3 years older than me, and she said this standing in the living room of a 2-bedroom apartment that she had come to think of as entirely hers, to a sister she had come to think of as a burden she was generously tolerating. I did not argue. I have learned that the person who argues in a doorway is the person who loses, and I was not going to lose in a doorway. I said, okay. If that's what you want. And I watched something flicker across her face, surprise, maybe even a little disappointment, because I think some part of Tara wanted the fight, wanted me to beg, wanted the scene that would prove, in front of her boyfriend who was sitting right there, that she was the strong sister carrying the weak one. I didn't give her the scene. I just said okay, and I went to my room, and I sat on my bed, and I did the math. Because my sister had made one enormous mistake, and she made it because she'd spent a year rewriting the story of how we came to live in that apartment until she genuinely believed her own version. The version where she was the responsible one who'd gotten us the place and I was the deadweight she'd been dragging along. She didn't remember, or had chosen to forget, that a year earlier, when she couldn't qualify for that apartment on her own, when her credit was thin and her income didn't meet the threshold and the leasing office turned her down flat, it was me who made it happen. Because I work in commercial leasing, I understood exactly what the building needed. And I was the one who signed the lease as the guarantor. My name is the name that guarantees that apartment. Not a roommate. The financially responsible party the entire lease rests on. She was trying to throw the guarantor out of the apartment the guarantor was guaranteeing. And she had no idea. Before I tell you what I found when I pulled up the lease that afternoon, and what I chose to do when I realized my sister had just tried to evict the one person legally holding her housing together, tell me what time it is where you are right now, and whether you've ever been called a freeloader by someone who was quietly standing on your shoulders. I want to see how far this story travels. I have to explain what I do, because it's the whole spine of this story, and it's the exact thing my family never took seriously because I was the youngest and the quietest. I work in commercial leasing. I'm young, I'm early in my career, and my job is essentially to understand the machinery of who gets to occupy a space and under what terms, the applications, the credit thresholds, the guarantors, the clauses, the entire invisible architecture that determines whether a person can walk into a building and call it home. It is not a glamorous job. Nobody at a party lights up when you say you work in leasing. But it taught me one thing that turned out to matter more than anything in my life. A lease is not about who lives somewhere. It's about who is responsible for it. Those are different people more often than you'd think, and the difference is the whole game. My family found my job boring in the specific way they found most things about me boring. I was the baby, the quiet one, the one who did something with real estate paperwork while Tara had the big personality and the big plans. My mother introduced Tara as my daughter, she's in fashion. Tara worked in retail buying and made it sound like haute couture, and me as, and this is Rhea, she's the quiet one. The quiet one. As though quiet were a career. But here is what my quiet job actually taught me, the thing that turned out to be everything. I spent my days watching people walk into leasing offices and get told yes or no by a system they didn't understand. And the ones who got told no weren't less deserving, they just didn't know the machinery. They didn't know about guarantors, about how a lease could be structured, about who really had to be responsible for a space and who merely lived in it. I learned to see the invisible skeleton underneath where people live, not who's standing in the room, but whose name is holding the room up. Most people never think about it. They just assume the person who acts like they own a place is the person the place belongs to. I knew better. I knew that the loudest person in the apartment and the person the apartment actually rests on are, very often, two completely different people, and that the second one is usually too quiet to correct the first. Tara leaned into being the star, because she needed the contrast. She was 3 years older, louder, more confident, the one who walked into rooms like she owned them. I was the one who watched from the edge of rooms and noticed things. And when we decided to get an apartment together after I finished school and moved to the city, the family narrative wrote itself instantly, big sister Tara, taking her little sister under her wing, showing her the ropes of city life. Everyone loved that story. It fit. It was also, from the very first day, upside down. I want to be fair, because fairness is the whole point of this story. Tara was not born cruel. She was the older sister who'd been cast as the capable one before she'd actually become capable, and who had spent her 20s performing a competence she didn't quite have, and who found it unbearable that the little sister she was supposed to be mentoring was quietly better at the actual mechanics of adult life than she was. Her contempt for me wasn't really contempt. It was the panic of someone whose whole identity was the one who has it together, living with the daily evidence that she didn't. And the evidence had a name, and the name was on the lease, and she'd spent a year making sure neither of us ever said it out loud. There were 3 moments I never let myself feel until that doorway made me feel all of them at once. When we first went to tour apartments, a year earlier, the leasing agent addressed every question to Tara, the older one, the confident one, and Tara answered all of them wrong, confidently, and I quietly corrected the terms afterward, and Tara told our mother that night that she'd handled the whole apartment thing. When her application got rejected and I stepped in as guarantor, she framed it, even to herself, as me helping with the paperwork, as though I'd filled out a form rather than put my own financial name on the line for her housing. And over the year that followed, as I paid my full half of the rent every month, on time, from a job she called real estate paperwork, she slowly built the story that she was carrying me. A story so complete that by the end she stood in a doorway and called me a freeloader and believed it. Each moment was small. That was the trap of it. Each one let Tara shave a little more of the truth away, until the version she lived in had no resemblance to the one that was actually written, in ink, on a lease in a leasing office's files. And I understood, eventually, why she needed the false version so badly. It wasn't simple selfishness. Tara had been the older sister our whole lives, the one our parents leaned on, the one who was supposed to have it figured out first, and she'd hit 28 without any of it feeling true. The job wasn't what she pretended. The confidence was a costume. And here was her baby sister, 5 years younger in the world, quietly qualifying for things Tara couldn't, understanding systems Tara found baffling, being the actual adult in a way Tara only performed. That's an unbearable thing to live next to every day. So she did what frightened people do. She built a story where the gap ran the other way, where she was the capable one carrying the struggling one, and she believed it because she needed it, and every time reality contradicted the story she shaved a little more reality away. The freeloader story wasn't about me. It was the last wall holding up a person who was terrified she was the one being carried. Then she tried to throw me out, and the gap between her story and the paperwork became a canyon she was about to fall into. Let me tell you exactly what happened a year earlier, because the paperwork is the whole story and my sister had erased it from her own memory. When we decided to get the apartment, we found a place we both loved, a 2-bedroom in a good building, the kind of building with an actual leasing office and actual standards. And we applied. And here is the thing my sister spent a year forgetting. Her application did not pass. Her credit was thin, she'd had some late payments she never talked about, and her income from retail buying, whatever she made it sound like a dinner, didn't meet the building's threshold. The leasing office was polite but firm. On her own, Tara could not have that apartment. She could not, on her own, have most apartments in buildings like that. I could have let it go. We could have found somewhere lesser. But I understood the machinery, because it's my job, and I knew there was a solution, a guarantor. Someone with the credit and the income and the willingness to be legally responsible for the lease if the tenant couldn't pay. Someone the building would accept as the financial backbone of the whole arrangement. So I became that person. Me. The baby sister, the quiet one, 24 at the time and early in my career, but already, because I understood this world, with the credit and the standing to qualify. I signed as guarantor. Which means, in plain terms, that the entire lease rests on me. That if anyone stops paying, the building comes to me. That my name is the name that makes that apartment legally possible. Tara's name is on the lease as a tenant. My name is on it as the guarantor, the responsible party, the one the whole thing depends on. I want to be precise about what I took on, because Tara spent a year making it sound like nothing. A guarantor isn't a cosigner who splits a bill. A guarantor is the person the building holds legally responsible for the entire lease, all of it, not half, if the tenant fails to pay. When I signed, I put my own credit, my own financial future, my own name on the line as the backstop for an apartment my sister couldn't qualify for. If she'd ever stopped paying, the building wouldn't have chased her. It would have come to me. At 24, early in my career, I made myself the financial foundation of my older sister's life, and I did it quietly, because that's who I am, and because I loved her, and because in my family the quiet one does the real thing while the loud one gets the credit, and I had made a kind of peace with that. What I hadn't made peace with, what I didn't even see coming, was that she'd take the thing I'd done to keep a roof over her head and use it, in her own mind, as evidence that I was the one without a roof of my own. And then we moved in, and I paid my half every month like clockwork, and somewhere over that year my sister performed the magic trick that people like Tara perform. She took a thing I had done for her, a significant thing, and she folded it up so small and tucked it so far away that she genuinely forgot it had happened. By the end she wasn't lying when she called me a freeloader. She'd rewritten her own memory so completely that she believed it. She'd thrown away the truth so she wouldn't have to feel the weight of owing it to me. So when she stood in that living room and told me to be gone by the weekend, and I said okay and went to my room and did the math, here's what the math actually was. She could not throw me out. Not because I was stubborn, but because I was the guarantor, and you cannot evict the party whose name guarantees the lease by simply telling them to leave. More than that, if I withdrew as guarantor, if I formally removed my name, which is the guarantor I had standing to initiate, the building would reevaluate the lease. And the building had already told us, a year ago, in writing, that Tara did not qualify on her own. Without me, there was no lease. Without me, my sister did not have that apartment. The person she'd just called a freeloader and ordered out by the weekend was the only reason she had a roof at all. I sat on my bed and I understood, with a strange cold clarity, that I held my sister's entire housing situation in my hands, and that she had just, out of pure performance, in front of her boyfriend, handed me every reason in the world to close my fist. I sat there for a long time. I could hear them through the wall, my sister and her boyfriend, the low murmur and the occasional laugh, the sound of two people who thought a problem had just been solved. And I looked around my room, the room in the apartment my name was holding up, and I felt the whole shape of the last year settle onto me at once. Every on-time rent payment she'd never acknowledged. Every dinner where she'd told the family she was showing me the ropes. Every small erasure, adding up to a doorway and the word freeloader. And underneath all of it, the lease, with my name on the line that mattered. I had never felt so powerful and so sad at the same time. Powerful, because I held everything. Sad, because holding everything meant my sister had never once seen me at all. Here is where the story becomes a choice, and it is not the choice my family expected, and it is probably not the one you'd expect either. Because I had it all. I could have withdrawn as guarantor the very next morning. I could have let the building do exactly what the building does, reevaluate, discover that the remaining tenant didn't qualify, and begin the process that would have put my sister in the exact position she'd just tried to put me in, except worse, because she had nowhere near my credit or my understanding of how to fix it. I could have let her learn, the hard way, in an actual leasing office, that the freeloader was the foundation. There would have been a perfect, architectural symmetry to it. She tried to remove me from the apartment, so I removed the apartment from her. I thought about it. Sitting on that bed, listening to her laugh with her boyfriend in the other room, already celebrating having handled the little sister problem, I thought about it very seriously, because a year of being quietly erased had built up a pressure I hadn't let myself feel until that afternoon. I even walked through it, step by step, the way I'd walk a client through a lease. Withdraw as guarantor. The building reevaluates. The building discovers what it already told us a year ago, that Tara doesn't qualify alone. The process begins. And somewhere in that process, my sister sits across a desk from a leasing officer and learns, in the worst possible way, that the little sister she threw out was the reason she had a home. It was clean. It was deserved. It was exactly proportional to what she'd done. And that's precisely why I didn't do it, because exactly proportional to what she'd done meant matching her, becoming her, letting the person who'd rewritten me into a freeloader turn me into someone who'd make her homeless. I didn't want to win her way. I wanted to leave as the person I actually was, and let her live inside the difference. But I kept asking myself what I actually wanted underneath the anger, and it wasn't my sister homeless. It was to stop being erased. And I realized that pulling the guarantor and letting her lose the apartment wouldn't actually give me that. It would just make me the villain in a new story, the vindictive sister who made Tara homeless, and it would let her be the victim, which is a role she'd play beautifully, and I'd spend the rest of my life being the one who did that to her. The craving to watch her lose everything and the need to finally be seen as who I actually was were two different things, and I was, even at 25, old enough to tell them apart. So I did the thing that was harder and quieter and, I think, more devastating than any eviction. I didn't withdraw as guarantor. I didn't threaten her. I didn't make a scene to match the one she'd tried to make. Instead, I moved out calmly, on my own terms, because she'd told me to and because honestly I no longer wanted to live with someone who could rewrite me into a freeloader to feel strong. I found my own place easily, because I qualified for it easily, because I am exactly the kind of person leasing offices say yes to. And I left my name on her lease as the guarantor. On purpose. There was a small, quiet satisfaction in that part that I'll admit to. I walked into a leasing office, a different building, a nicer one, honestly, and I applied on my own, and I qualified on my own, in about the time it takes to shake a hand, because my credit and my income and my understanding of the whole process were exactly what a building wants. No guarantor needed. No one carrying me. The baby sister my own family thought couldn't stand on her own 2 feet signed her own lease, alone, the same week she was thrown out of an apartment for being a freeloader. Nobody was there to see it. But I saw it. And after a year of being erased, being the only witness to my own competence turned out to be enough. Do you understand what that does? It means I moved out of the apartment while remaining the invisible foundation that lets her stay in it. Every month that she lives there, in the apartment where she called me a freeloader, she is living inside a thing my name is still holding up. I didn't take the roof away. I left it exactly where it was, resting, as it always had, on the shoulders she'd spent a year pretending were carrying her. She found out the way these things always come out. A few months after I moved, something in the lease needed re-signing, a renewal, a routine thing, and the leasing office contacted the guarantor to confirm terms. The guarantor. Me. And Tara, who by then had fully settled into the story that the apartment was hers and always had been, got a call from her own leasing office referring to her sister as the party responsible for her lease, and she called me, and for the first time in a year her voice didn't have the older sister lilt in it. The leasing office said you're the guarantor, she said. On my apartment. What does that even mean? And I explained it to her, plainly, without cruelty, the way I'd explain it to any client. I told her that a year ago her application hadn't qualified. That I'd signed as guarantor so we could have the place. That my name was the financial backbone of the entire lease, and had been the whole time, including the year she'd spent calling me a freeloader, and including the afternoon she'd ordered me out by the weekend. There was a long silence. And then she said, quietly, but I told you to leave. And I said the sentence I'd say again exactly the same way. I said, I know. You told the guarantor to leave the apartment she guarantees. I left, Tara, because you asked me to, and because I deserved better than a doorway. But I left my name on your lease, because I'm not the kind of person who makes their sister homeless to win an argument. You spent a year deciding I was carrying nothing. I was carrying the whole building. You just never once looked up to see whose shoulders it was on. She didn't say anything for a long time. And then she started to cry, and it wasn't the performing kind. I knew her performing kind, and this wasn't it. She said, "Why didn't you tell me? All year, why didn't you just tell me?" And there it was, the accusation folded into the apology, the reflex of a person who has just learned she was wrong and is already looking for a way to make the wrongness somehow the other person's fault. And I understood, in that moment, why I'd never told her. Because I shouldn't have had to. Because a person who was carrying you would remember. Because the fact that Tara had needed to be reminded that I'd guaranteed her housing was the entire proof of the thing, that she'd erased it precisely because remembering it would have meant she wasn't the strong one, and being the strong one mattered to her more than the truth did. I said, "I didn't tell you because you shouldn't have needed telling. And because part of me wanted to see how long you'd let yourself believe you were carrying me, when the whole time your name only worked on that lease because mine was underneath it." I could have said more. I had a year of it stored up, every dinner, every ropes of the city comment, every time she'd let the family believe she'd gotten us the apartment. I could have listed it all, chapter and verse, and made her sit in it. But I didn't, because I'd already decided who I was going to be in this, and that person didn't need to itemize the debt. The leasing office had said the one sentence that mattered. Everything else would just have been me needing her to feel as small as she'd made me feel, and I discovered, a little to my surprise, that I didn't need that anymore. Knowing the truth was written down, and that she now knew it too, was enough. It turned out the thing I'd wanted all year wasn't for Tara to lose. It was just for the record to be read out loud, once, by someone she couldn't argue with. The 18 months after that were not dramatic. That's the part these stories never show. Tara stayed in the apartment. My name stayed on the lease. I never used it as leverage, never held it over her, never once mentioned it again after that call, because the whole point was that I wasn't the kind of person who'd use it, and using it would have made me into the thing she'd accused me of being, someone who saw our relationship as a transaction. I let her keep her home. I just stopped letting her keep the story. Because the story was over. There was no more carrying my little sister, because we both now knew, in ink, who had been carrying whom. Tara couldn't perform the capable big sister role anymore, at least not to me, because I'd seen the paperwork and so had she. And a strange thing happened once that performance became impossible. She got, slowly, more real. A person who can't pretend to be carrying you has to actually figure out how to stand next to you instead, and it turns out Tara, underneath the performance, was someone worth standing next to. She started asking me things instead of telling me things. She started, awkwardly, to treat me like someone who knew things, because I did, and now she couldn't pretend otherwise. There was one moment, maybe 6 months after I moved out, that told me the story had really ended. Tara texted me, not about anything big, just a genuinely bewildered question about a clause in her renewal, because for the first time she was reading her own lease and realizing she didn't understand it. And instead of pretending she did, the way old Tara would have, she just asked me. "You know about this stuff," she wrote. "What does this mean?" 4 words in the middle of a boring text, "You know about this stuff," and they undid a decade of being the quiet one. My sister had finally admitted, in the most ordinary way possible, that I knew something she didn't. I answered her question. I didn't make it a thing. But I saved the text. My mother took the longest, because she had the most to unbuild. Her whole map of her daughters, capable Tara, quiet little Rhea, did not survive learning that the quiet one had been the guarantor on the capable one's apartment for 2 years. When she finally understood it, she called me, and she was quiet for a while, and then she said, "I've been telling everyone Tara got you settled in the city." And I said I knew. And she said, it was the other way around, wasn't it? The whole time. And I said yes. It wasn't a grand apology. But it was my mother finally reading the lease of our family correctly, seeing whose name was actually underneath, and I decided to let it be enough. And Tara took the longest of anyone, because she had the most performance to give up. But about a year in, she called me, and she said, I want to say something and I don't want you to make it easy for me. She said, I threw the person holding up my whole life out of my apartment, and called her a freeloader, in front of my boyfriend, to feel strong. And you left your name on my lease anyway. I've spent a year trying to understand why you do that, and I finally get it. You did it because you actually were the strong one. You were the strong one the whole time. I just needed so badly to be, that I couldn't let myself see it. She didn't ask me to forgive her. That's the only reason it landed. People ask me whether it was revenge. I didn't evict anyone. I didn't withdraw as guarantor, or let the building come for my sister, or make her homeless to win the argument she started. I didn't do a single one of the things the setup seems to promise. Tara did the throwing out, her own rewritten story did the damage, and the truth, when the leasing office finally said it out loud, did all the rest, without my having to lift a hand. All I did was refuse to use what I held. I was the guarantor the whole time. I could have been the guarantor who pulled the foundation and watched the building fall. I chose to be the guarantor who moved out with her dignity intact and left the roof standing over the sister who'd just thrown her out, because that roof was mine to hold and I would rather hold it than win. Here is what everybody lost. Tara lost the story, the one where she was the capable big sister carrying her deadweight little sister through city life. She lost it the day her own leasing office called her sister the guarantor. But she gained a sister she could finally see, and the knowledge that when she'd thrown me out and handed me every reason to destroy her, I held the roof up over her instead. That's a better thing to have than the story was. My mother lost the tidy map of her daughters, and she's the only one still, slowly, redrawing it correctly. And I lost something too, and it wasn't Tara. I lost the belief that if I just quietly did the responsible thing, and paid my half, and guaranteed the lease, and asked for no credit, my family would eventually notice who was actually holding things up. They never noticed on their own. It took a doorway, and a threat, and a leasing office saying my name out loud, before anyone in my family finally understood that the quiet one wasn't being carried. The quiet one was the guarantor. I keep a copy of that original lease now. Not a photo, not a keepsake, the lease, the actual document, in a folder in my desk. Because that document is the thing that was actually true. My family could call me the quiet one, could tell the story of big sister Tara showing little Rhea the ropes, could stand in a doorway and call me a freeloader. They could not, in the end, argue with the signature page, where the guarantor's name sits underneath the whole arrangement, holding it up, exactly where it had been the entire time. They thought I was the one being carried. It turned out I was the one whose name the whole roof was resting on. So if there's someone in your life who's decided you're the freeloader, the deadweight, the one being carried, someone who's rewritten the story until they can't see whose shoulders they're standing on, ask yourself one thing tonight. Are you actually the one being carried? Or have you just been holding something up so quietly, so completely, that the person on top of it has forgotten you're the reason they're not on the ground? Thank you for staying with this story to the end. Every character and event in it is fictional, written for reflection and entertainment. But if any of it felt familiar, I hope it leaves you with this: the person who does the quiet, responsible, unglamorous work of holding things together is very often the person the loud ones have decided is contributing nothing. Being the foundation is a thankless job, because a foundation is the part of a building nobody looks at. But when someone tries to throw you out of the very thing you're holding up, you get to decide who you are, and there is more strength in leaving the roof standing over someone who wronged you than there ever is in letting it fall. Hold things up because that's who you are. Just never let anyone convince you that you were the one being carried.